Okay. Hi, welcome to this talk on implementing a learning team. And, there was so much great content this morning and through the afternoon that I wanted to have references to like 6 of the talks that I could throw in here. But I decided that last-minute edits probably wouldn't be a good idea. But we did talk about, or David Woods talked about, how you learn and what teams learn. This is a case study showing we actually did this, and it actually works. So what I want to point out in terms of doing a learning team is that often as engineers we have an imbalance. We talk in learning from incidents that we want to pay attention to the people. We want to have a blameless environment. We want to make it safe for people to talk about the things that went wrong. That's great. That's important. But sometimes we neglect those very same people when it comes to figuring out solutions. We can't just turn to technology. As Charity pointed out, 5 more dashboards isn't going to solve your problem. So it isn't just data that's going to do what we need. So at LinkedIn, once upon a time when I worked there, and this clicker is not going to work, so I'll just use this. We had this kind of eye chart that would come out on an hourly basis. The data was also available through an API for those of you who like to pull your own data. But it came off our business intelligence system. And this would go out to senior executives. It would go out to engineers, SREs, telling key business metrics, a whole bunch of them, page views, and like 7 different actions that were taken on the LinkedIn site, and how they performed this week in a given hour compared to last week in the same hour. And then the differences, namely red or green. Is it up this week? Green. Or is it down? Red. Now, the problem that we had with this, there were a couple of problems actually. One is it went to the CEO. The CEO, Jeff Weiner at the time, was an exceptional pattern recognizer person. And we used to joke that somehow he had an army of people who were looking at how the site was performing and letting him know when he should ping engineers because things weren't going the way they were supposed to be going. He didn't actually. He just could look at this and say, hey, what's happening right there at 2100 UTC? Because fortunately we did run everything in one time zone for the company. Why is this going pear-shaped, so to speak? But the problems with this data were, number 1, it lagged real time by a couple of hours. Number 2, it had filtering that was applied to these data sources that couldn't really be computed in real time. It was subtracting out noxious traffic, I'll say. What the engineers had was this kind of representation, which was within 5 minutes of real time, 1-minute intervals. And the challenge was, how do you reconcile these two to give the engineers something that they can act on effectively and forestall a 6 a.m. or 3 a.m. email from the CEO saying, hey, what's going on with the site? Now, part of the challenge here, because this is a socio-technical system, we have to talk about the people. We had 2 teams, one based on the west coast of the US, and one based 12.5 or 13.5 hours away in Bangalore. And typically when problems would occur, they happened to be right at that sweet spot that Chad Todd spoke about, the handover window. When one team is getting ready to go away, and the next team has just shown up and doesn't really have context yet. Of course, the outgoing team wanted to leave. They may not have seen incipient signs of problems. They may not have noticed. It may not have reached a threshold of awareness. And the new team coming in would say, well, yeah, we look at it half an hour later, and yeah, something really does look bad. I can see why I've got this email from the CEO in my inbox. But then, of course, the outgoing team was gone and there was no handover communication. So there had to be a better way. What could we do to solve that? Well, being engineers, I'd have to say we went for the more data approach. Triple exponential smoothing. Doesn't that sound awesome? Totally technical. Well, the nice thing about this, in this case, is that it failed utterly. The more data approach just didn't work. So we went for the learning team approach. Now, my model for a learning team here is learning to fly. We start with a couple of experienced engineers, the ones who could look at the system and say, well, yes, this is the problem, and reply to the CEO within a few minutes, if not anticipating the CEO's inquiry in the first place. But of course, a couple of engineers for a site handling hundreds of millions of users is not very scalable. We had to expand the expertise pool. So we started with the experienced engineers leading, and this learning team, we brought together key people from both the West Coast and the India teams. We met periodically, and we started with, let's have everybody look at this data together and talk about what we're seeing. Educate the intuition of the less experienced engineers by means of the experienced engineer. So we started with the experienced engineer leading, the less experienced or the learners following and asking questions. What is it you're looking at here? Why does this make you feel uneasy? And then, as in learning to fly, we move toward having the learners take the stick in certain circumstances, but then filtering it through the experienced engineer. The learners would say, it looks like this to me. And the engineer would then, the experienced engineer would say, looks good, send the response to the CEO. Or, well, no, look at it this way. Then we moved on to the learners led, but monitored by the experienced engineer. So they would actually push the button without consulting up front on sending the response email. And then ultimately, full flight certification. Everybody was comfortable that the learning group could do a good job of responding to the emails and without having to be overseen by the experienced engineer. So we did this in a learning group through a regular weekly meeting. We reviewed the last week's data. We reviewed the questionable time periods, whether they were an incident that sparked an email or not. We looked at all of it and said, what are you seeing? And then we built common ground amongst everybody, the experienced engineers, the inexperienced engineers. We talked about what other systems and services within the LinkedIn ecosystem could be first or second order contributors, because we had some situations where it was a third order, third degree removed system that contributed to some impact in user behavior. And so we talk about how do they impact the results? How do you look at it to figure out if that's going on? And we also had the real world to contend with. For those of you in the United States, Super Bowl weekend. We would see noticeable impacts on site traffic because of the Super Bowl. Even down to, it's now halftime. We would see changes in site traffic based on that. Or Cricket World Cup, or FIFA. All of these things would have noticeable impact on those key business metrics. Thanks to time and date, one of the things we discovered in the course of our learning review was something as simple as this international holidays going on in the next 7 days. The team was able to look at all of these things and say, gee, we see that it is going to be Eritrea's Independence Day on May 24th. Do we think that we have a significant portion of our users in Eritrea who will be likely to either use the site more or less because of this holiday? And yes, it takes some filtering out, but at least it gave the raw data for the teams to look at and compare against what they had seen and what they were learning. So, key elements for a learning team approach, and I recognize that time is coming short here. when you're doing a learning team discussion, start by using work as imagined versus work as done. I apologize for the initialisms here if you're not familiar with them. Use the contrast between what you think should happen versus what the real world delivered to your plate to drive your inquiries. Groups can do better than individuals at identifying problems and solving them, as long as you avoid problems of groupthink. You don't want everybody in the same room parroting what the experienced engineer said or what the director or VP said. You want everybody to be able to look at the data and come to some independent judgments. Because the people at the sharp end have the greatest knowledge about the problems. They also have the greatest knowledge about potential solutions. And if they get squashed because of intimidation from more senior folk of any sort, then you're going to lose out on the perspective that they can bring. The more effort that you put into understanding the problem, the better your solution will be. And identifying, solving, and reflecting upon both the problem and its solutions are really key to this process. And I've got a bunch of quotes that I'm going to have to leave out just because of time. Now, over subsequent years, and I literally mean 3 to 4 years from the time we did this focused learning team exercise, we built some more tooling. We didn't just rely on time and date, although we continued to use that to some degree, mainly through their API. We built tools such as Third Eye, which provided different slices of data across our incoming traffic streams that helped the responding teams to say, look, something happened to iOS here. That's the big red bars. And maybe we shipped something, maybe Apple shipped something, maybe something else happened that all of a sudden impacted the iOS percentage of traffic compared to desktop or Android. This helped. But again, this tooling was built with the benefit of knowing what questions to ask because of understanding the problem and working through it through the learning team. There's a model here for group and individual learning that I commend to you to consider. The team comes together to align, build common ground. They gather insights from everybody in the group, everybody and the diversity of opinion being critical here. They develop plans to how to respond. And some of these can be technical plans. Let's build this, or let's go get this data. Some of them can be, let's have these 3 people work together to figure out how to respond or what to do. And then you do experiments, and you iterate. And then, with the benefit of all that, you distill it and promulgate that information more widely to the greater community within the company in this case. You can do learning teams on a variety of cadences or cycles. Maybe they're an everyday thing. Some of these might be an ad hoc. Think of a stand-up, even in terms of software development, is in some ways a daily learning team. We did one with a weekly cadence for a specific time bound. You can do them on an event-triggered basis, a postmortem or a retrospective group coming together to look at and learn from an incident is an event-triggered learning team, or can be if you do it right. Or you can do it periodically. Maybe you do it quarterly, annually. You want to convert your short-term learnings into long-term learnings. We did this with retrospectives at LinkedIn because we had individual retrospectives would occur on their own schedule. But then on a weekly basis, we had a group of people who came together to try to extract the themes back to Alex and Sarah's talk, pulling out the themes and the common patterns across those retrospectives and the incidents that they referred to. So coming to the end here, I do have references that will be available when the slides go out at the end, but resilience is among you. Don't forget to use the people that you have on your teams and Sorry, that's my clock warning me that I'm running out of time. Don't just rely on your technical systems. Use the socio side, use the people side as well to complement. Learning teams bring you characteristics of high reliability organizations. I don't have time to go into those details right now. But we've been binge watching NCIS New Orleans recently. The lead character in that has this saying, which I figured was a good way to wrap this up, is go, learn things. And if we had time for questions, I would take them, but I will be happy to respond in Slack on a thread, or catch me in the hallways afterwards. And if you want to take a picture of the resources and links, you can grab it here right now. Otherwise, it'll be on whatever comes out for recordings and slides that are posted later. Thank you.